Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday the 5th of March, and you are watching episode 161 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Water Trumps the Regions, is my guest Sophie Baldwin. Sophie is a former proud dairy farmer of 20 years and a regional journalist. She is currently the CEO of Southern Riverina Irrigators, representing 1,800 generational farming families, gee whiz, this is bad, in the Riverina, and has found herself very involved in politics of the Murray Darling Basin plan, water policy and legislation. Sophie is passionate about agriculture and irrigation, believing that irrigation is not only essential for the future of staple food production, but also environmental improvement opportunities. She believes that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan has unfortunately been caught up in the broad arena of climate and environmental politics, resulting in Australia now being in danger of losing swathes of intergenerational farming families, staple food production, and the ability to readily achieve cost-effective, positive environmental outcomes on our farms. Welcome, Sophie.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
I have touched on the subject of the Murray Basin Plan over the last couple of years with different interviews, ranging from, I've spoken to Chris Brooks probably about 2 years ago from Southern Irrigators when he was the chairman. I've had a number of conversations with Ken Jury in South Australia, who's a big advocate of returning the lower lakes in South Australia to an estuarine environment as it was originally, and also Darren Bortelli from Bortelli Wines and the impacts of the restrictions on the water availability. So we've been through, for the last 3 years in particular, we've had basically 2,750 gigalitres placed for environmental flows, and then just a year or so ago they approved another 450 gigalitres. But you're saying there's over 4,600 gigalitre years per year allocated to environment requirements now. So as a percentage of the flow and what was available for, how big is that?
Well, it's a pretty big amount, Bill. So when we say they've got 4,600 gigalitres, that's state and federal water, and it's not, they did have some previous to the basin plan. So obviously as the basin plans progressed, they've brought back more and more water, and under our Restoring Our Rivers bill, that's just where Plibersec's basically taken away any of the protections for our communities by removing the socio-economic test. And she's just going full steam ahead for this 450 gigalitres of water. Mind you, we don't know how they're even going to be able to deliver it, because obviously upstream, we're the mid-Murray, and our rivers and creeks are getting absolutely smashed to try and deliver these volumes of water downstream. We have, if you think of the river a bit like a bathtub, a bathtub only has a certain amount of volume and then the water overflows. So what we're finding with the way that they're changing the way they manage the system, we're actually getting bigger floods because, without getting technical, our dams have more and more stored water in them, which is obviously environmental water. Carryover comes into play as well, even though farmers like carryover. So our dams are becoming full of water, when previously that water would obviously be used on farm, particularly over spring and autumn. So things are all changing right along the basin, and the outcomes of that for us, because our water is secure, we have the dams, they're after our water because, they can store it and then they can send it downstream. So that's what makes our water so attractive. So under the basin plan, 82% of the water that's been brought back has actually come from the Southern Basin. So, we have done our fair share of the heavy lifting. And with this last round of buybacks, Plibersek said that she wasn't going to rush them through and it was going to be staged and, all of a sudden we've got 170 GL on the table in less than a year. So we've begged her to come and have a look at our regions, not just SRI. A lot of the groups around us, politicians, have all councils, and she just won't talk to anybody in the Southern Basin. She refuses to talk about water, and yet she is absolutely decimating our staple food production.
But the thing in her defence is she's trying to get re-elected into politics every three and a
100%.
half years. So she's got to appeal to the people in her electorate.
In
It
Redfern,
doesn't.
yes.
You don't really matter, but you don't have any effect on her re-election. She can
No.
upset you as much as you like, and if that's what her electorate wants is more water to just be flow out to sea, well then she'll get re-elected. That is one of the biggest problems is the people who are doing these things don't face the consequences of what they're opting for.
But I'm sure, Bill, that people in Redfern eat the same staple foods that we do every day. I'm sure they have coffee. They probably put milk in their coffee. They might have cereal. I'm sure they eat bread, rice, all those things that are grown here in our region because we have irrigation. If we don't have irrigation, we are not going to have those foods. In the last drought, there was no rice grown at all in Australia. So it was a very, very small portion. So, we had no rice. Also, then we went into COVID, all those things. Then you've got to look at, are other countries going to be able to export to us? Like, I don't know. When you're actually in the space, you just cannot understand these decisions. It just blows your mind how
But
ridiculous they are.
of course they're ridiculous, but the thing is the people in Mrs. Pavlovic's electorate, they go down to Coles and Woolies to get their food. Now,
Mm.
if they want a kilo of rice, um, they don't care if it comes from Thailand or wherever. They just want a kilo of rice. They want milk. Doesn't matter if it's imported. They don't see the connection of their food to our land, to your security, and the nation's security and the nation's wealth. And I've had a debate with some people. I think it's up here we've got the green shirts. They support farmers and things like that, and they said that one of their roles is to educate people in the city. But do you really think we can educate people in the city that the people on the land, and it's not just in farming, but it's people in logging, in the sheep industry, and all those sort of things, and all the other regional industries. Do you think we can actually teach them, or do they don't even care? It's just boils down to as time's gone by, the people in the regions, well, we provide the food, we provide the mineral wealth that gets exported to bring us export dollars. We just don't get a Guernsey or a thought for a blink of an eye from the people in the city.
Yeah, look, yeah, I agree 100%, Bill. It is a huge problem, but also, I mean, I know farming better than a lot of the other industries, but I know what we're up against too is also there's a lot of misleading advertising out there about the environmental benefits of the basin plan. And we can't compete with the budget of the federal government. She's got pretty deep pockets. She put out a pretty damaging media campaign last year. And we basically saying that rivers are over extracted, and that was the video that they actually used pictures that weren't even Australian. But anyway, aside from that, we just cannot compete. So I noticed the other day there was an ad on a fishing show with Merv Hughes, and Merv Hughes was on there saying that he supports environmental water. It's good for our rivers. So do we, because we know if we don't have healthy, sustainable river systems, we can't farm. So we don't want over extraction, but here in the Southern Basin, we're metered and licensed, and every single drop of water that we take, we is measured and metered. So, and we have a sustainable diversion limit, which is, how much water we're allowed to take each year. And we don't even go close to that anymore. We actually are trending on a history of underuse now. So if we could get that underuse back up and our productivity increased, that would be a great thing for the country. It'd be a great thing for exports, exporting food overseas, all those things, volume on the shelf. But instead, for some reason, this country appears to think that irrigation is wrecking our rivers. So in the Southern Basin, only about 28% of the water available now is used for irrigation, towns, and industry. So the rest of that water is already goes to the river. So and when they brought in the basin plan, they refused to give it any credence that irrigation is dual purpose water. So, it does support biodiversity on farm. The actual channel system is an environment. There's birds, there's fish, there's turtles, there's ricali, snakes, you name it. Everything lives in an irrigation channel. And that irrigation channel used to deliver water to the farm. And then, the farm would have his own little channel system. Now, a lot of that's been replaced with black brute pipe, and that's brought great efficiencies, in some respects. In other respects, it means we've gone from a gravity-fed system to now a pump system, which has increased costs, but it's also brought productivity to land where people couldn't farm before. So, there's swings and roundabouts for some of that. But, I sit in on all these meetings and I continually come up against this thing that, irrigation is a dirty word and it's destroying the environment. Well, I've got friends on farms and, they've got dams that are just chock-a-block full of water birds. They've got wetlands on their farms that they put a bit of water in if they can. They've got fence-off land. They've planted trees. You won't get a better land custodian than a farmer, because if a farmer does not have a healthy environment, they can't farm. So, people are changing their practices. Yes, back in the 1980s and early 1990s, the river was over extracted and it needed to be fixed up. And, farmers in our region actually gave allocation back to the river because they acknowledged that, there was too much water, divvied out to irrigation. So, that's all been brought in now. But what's happening is people are being sold this lie that, we're destroying the river and the river actually needs more water. But the river is a bit like a bath. Once you fill it up, it overflows. Simply adding water is not the answer. And that's been the mentality of the Basin Plan since its inception. It was all about just getting this volumetric target. And the volumetric target was, this number that was written on the back of an envelope in some room somewhere based on this poor modelling. And last year, the MDBA acknowledged that their modelling and some of their, like the 80,000 megs a day flow to South Australia, they know that they can't achieve that now. 80,000 megs a day, that is. They know that they can't achieve that anymore. So some of the outcomes are wrong. The 2,000 megs to the Coorong over a 3-year period, I think it is. I might be wrong on that, but whatever that is, like all these things that were the original premise of the Basin Plan are undeliverable, and they're still taking water away.
but the other thing is, do, do they have an actual set of KPIs that sort of are understandable, and then you can look at, what they mean to achieve them or anything? Because I only sort of get the impression, because I'm distant, I'm up in North Queensland, but I seem to get the feeling that a good bulk of the intent is obviously, yes, just let a lot of flow to go down the river and go out to sea, because no, that's the environment type thing. The other thing is to keep the lower lakes in South Australia up to level, because with the barrages there, basically, I think the minimum height they try to keep is about 3/4 of a metre across that shallow pond that they got down there. Um, and it's done by fresh water. Although historically, before the barrages were there, it was a estuarine environment. So
100% was.
what are the KPIs that they have down as their goals, sort of thing, or are they unknown,
So,
or
so
just
80,000 megs a day at the South Australian border was one of them. It was a volume of water over a period of time into the Coorong and Lower Lakes. They were their two major kind of goals. The other thing that is wrong with the basin plan is, which is written into it, that water should just go to the highest user. So if you look at that, that in itself is a massive problem, because the highest user is, let's be honest, it's probably the corporate almonds, or whatever they've got downstream. A dairy farmer, a cereal grower, somebody that grows hay, to feed livestock, they're all got lower profit margins, and obviously they're going to be the things, and rice, they're going to be the things that'll be kneecapped, because I know in the area where I am, so in northern Victoria, in the Riverina, there's Murray Dairy is like a part of Dairy Australia, and so like that's our region that we're in, and we're a significant producer of milk, and particularly we were years ago when we had irrigation, and I think it's around about 1.6 billion litres of milk is produced here now, down from about a high of 3.1 billion litres back in the day. So like milk production here has halved, and like you probably find, Bill, that you're drinking milk produced in the Murray Dairy region, because a lot of our milk goes up to northern New South Wales and into Queensland. And if our farmers won't be able to keep doing that when they've got to pay, hundreds of dollars for water
well, they've
and
done a
delivery
pretty
of
good
water.
job. Yeah. Well, they've done a pretty good job of knocking out our Atherton tableland dairy and that over the years. I think we've gone from about 300 small producers to less than 100,
Yeah.
probably less than that now. But that's basically on cost of electricity and things like that, and other restrictions.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that,
look, yeah. For us here, I remember when we bought our first dairy farm, um, my ex-husband and I, our we bought that with 570 megs of water. We bought that with the farm. And then consequently, I think it's about 2006 or 2008 when water was separated from land, because previously water was part of the land deal. So, you couldn't buy water. And the value of water was in the food it could produce. See, now it's a $3 billion unregulated tradable commodity. So, I don't know how you unpack that either. But the evolution of the water market, has also impacted viability for us as well. So, I don't want to sound like a whinger, and sometimes I think I do, but at the end of the day, the country of Australia is seriously going to be looking at food shortages at some point in the future. We're going to go from being we're going to be a net importer. We already import a lot of dairy and not just dairy, we're importing cereals and rice and all those other things now that we used to grow. So I think over the last 2 years, input costs have grown by $7 billion to about $40 billion now. And that's, importing food like dairy, cereals, and I think red meat was a bit of that as well.
Well, I think that's a problem because the two big supermarkets, their volume sort of thing, and they can work out that they can get stuff from overseas at a certain price or whatever. So there's not an incentive for them if they want to get their margins up, and that the best thing to do is high cost Australian producers. Get sidelined in favour of importation and that. But the high cost, we've become a high cost producer in a lot of things, but simply because of regulation and red tape, green tape, and now black tape.
Mm.
What do
So
you think?
I'll give you, I'll give you
As a percentage of cost, what do you think the regulatory burden has become as a percentage of doing your job?
I'll give you just an example of that with water. So, our Murray farmers, this is in the Riverina, New South Wales Murray General Security farmers. So we're facing a 184% increase in government charges over the next 5 years. So basically now, if a farmer uses a meg of water, they pay about $14 in government charges. Which is, that's not water delivery or anything like that. That is just simply a government charge, and I think it's about $14. So under this increase by 2025, that $14 is going to morph into about just over $40. So if a farmer uses, 1,000 megs, they're going to be looking at paying $40,000 just in government charges. That's not water delivery costs. You could probably add another anywhere from 60 to 100 bucks on top of that. So our farmers are going to be looking at costs of somewhere around, $150 a megaliter. That's before they put any fertilizer, any diesel, employ staff. That's before any input costs at all. So, I don't know what farmer could afford that, and that's 5 years down the track. And there's other regions in New South Wales that are facing, bigger hikes than us. So, but these hikes are because the MDBA, Water New South Wales, all those government bodies are putting out so many changes all the time, and they're coming at our farmers all the time. They need to employ more people to try and deliver on their, in some ways, I would say, ridiculous legislation in many cases. And that red tape and all of that is now being passed on to the farmers. But the farmers are a shrinking pool. So Water New South Wales, you would think it would be in their interests to perhaps look at their business model, because they're paid on the megs of water that that a farmer uses. So with a shrinking pool, they're hiking up their fees because there's less and less farmers in the system to pay, the fees and costs associated with running Water New South Wales. So, this is how it snowballs, and this, impacts on productivity, and some farmers think, you know, this is all just too hard. We they
But
the,
it beggars belief that the governments and the bureaucrats are effectively driving you out of business, driving farmers out of business, driving food production to being non-existent. They got no. The people in government and in Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra and that don't seem to have any realisation exactly what the impact is, or if they do, they don't bloody care.
Well, Murray Irrigation, they deliver water to our farmers in the Riverina, and they have like I think their 5 year average productive average is about 550,000 megs. So they do deliver environmental water and stuff as well, but their productive capacity is about 550,000 megs. So that if you add that times that by the 40, I think it's I don't know 20 something million dollars that is going to come out of our region just for government charges in 5 years' time. So like that's 22 or $3 million or whatever it was that could actually would normally be spent in our communities. So that flow on effect into our communities is then going to be lost, because, obviously that's got to go to pay government, like all these fees and charges. So this is the flow on effect. And, we're finding like our little rural towns, there's a lot of empty shops in them now. And once that starts, there's nothing to replace it. They'll say to you, tourism. Tourism is going to replace, because there's going to be more water in the river. Well, where I live, when they flood, the bush, you can't get out there because the roads are closed. So obviously, they also breed a lot of mozzies. So people want to go out there and they're spending the whole time slapping their arms and, whatever else. So tourism isn't going to replace that lost revenue. I've got dairy farmer friends. One of my friends, he told me last year that I think he said he used 1,200 megaliters of water and he generated, I think it was about $2.5 million. So, and then we say that $2.5 million, when that flows through the community, has a flow on effect of about $4 to $7. So, that money that he generated as it flows through the community all of a sudden becomes $10 million. All that's lost as well, Bill. So, it's not just food on the shelves. It's also the fabric of our communities, because the wealth of them is underpinned by irrigation, and particularly where we are. So, the Sunrise has already said if this next 450 gigalitres of water goes through, that's the end of Sunrise. So, and all that Sunrise employs. So,
With the two different systems, the Murray, and then if you look at the Darling, I get the impression, because the Darling really, the water comes from the north and it comes through a much more dry area and it flows. I don't think it's anywhere near that of the Murray. I mean, the
no,
Murray
it's
gets
not.
more. The Murray gets more water than it ever did naturally, because the Snowy River system is basically designed, and it took water that used to flow to the eastern seaboard, and now it comes down into the Murray system, sort of thing. So the Murray is actually carrying a lot more water than it did historically, sort of thing. But I know a couple of people on the Darling River system, and it's already started to really affect a lot of the small towns, to the extent,
100%.
that actually face, being wiped off the map. Now, I don't think it's as bad on the Murray, simply because, A, you've got more water in that system and you've got a bigger population. You've got people from Melbourne sort of coming and supporting that sort of region. But on the Darling, I think the impact's a lot more visible at this stage. How do you
Oh,
think,
yeah. It's a different river system,
percentage-wise,
Bill, for
this
sure.
is going to go on in regards to, even on those towns on the Murray, even the bigger towns, I mean, like Echuca and all those sort of things. Swan Hill, that's probably a smaller town, they'll probably be adversely affected. But what do you think is the social impact? Because, like you're saying, the social impact in regards to the river and what they're doing is now no longer a factor for, making their decisions for the government. So what are you seeing on the ground in
So
communities?
it's not just towns on the river, Bill, either, though. It is the towns off the river that are, particularly starting to get impacted. So Warkall's a little place in the Riverina, and in 2016, the Murray Darling Basin Authority actually did a study on Warkall because they took, I think it's about 92 GL out of Warkall, and that was just bought back through buybacks and whatever.
That's just on
And
the North New South Wales side, isn't it? Is that
yeah,
just
yeah,
on the,
it's
yeah.
on the New South Wales side. So yeah, so and at that time, I can't remember the figure of jobs that were lost, but they went back and did a study on it, and it basically showed that the jobs had halved. There was a small dairy industry in Warkall, and that had basically gone. And in 2025 now, Warkall used to have two schools. Now it's only got one. I think they're like I might get the numbers a bit wrong, but like I know the Warkall Primary School, like that had like about 45 or 50 kids at its peak. I think it was down to about, got down to a low of about 8 or 9. I think it's picked up a little bit now, but it's nowhere near that. The pub is only open X amount of days. The football club's gone. The cricket club, oh, no, sorry, the tennis club's gone. And I actually do know that there is a dairy farm that has started back up in Warkall, but basically that study showed, and it wasn't just Warkall, there was lots of other towns they did studies on, but it basically showed that, you take the water away, you lose jobs, you lose your work base, people move on, because they've got to find jobs. So, tourism, where I live in Chuka like it is a tourist region, but, the other thing that they're doing with as they change the management of the river, um, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is wanting to put big flushes of water down the river in spring and use a lot of their water then. So what that does is that puts our region at risk of flood because obviously that's when we get a lot of our rains. So as they wet up the system and send these big volumes of water down, if we get a big flow of rain, a big fall of rain or whatever, the system's wet up, there's nowhere for it to go, and then we start to see flooding like we had in 2022 where water went in places it had never ever been before. But the other side to that is the river is then kind of run low at times as well. So then, that kind of has a bit of an impact on tourism, if you've got low river volumes as well. So, or you've got the extreme high volumes, because when we had the floods, obviously the river was shut for, I can't remember how long it was shut for, but it was shut for a period of time because there was so much water in the system. So, not that flood was just totally because of bad management, but changed management certainly contributed to the extent and the veracity of the 2022 floods for us.
But the other thing is too, I mean, the dams up in the snow that release it down to Goulburn and a few other places, they have to release it then because the snow melt comes through and the dams have probably already got a lot of water in, so it's got to be released. It's a problem in fact that, all right, you build these big dams that already got a lot of water in it anyway, then the snow melts, it's got to overflow, so they've got to release it. And the trouble is, the rivers that they go down never had that flow before we invented the snowy steam and invented dams and things like that. So the volume of water that actually goes down, and I can base this on my experience with who had friends on the Goulburn, and and the water that comes down the Goulburn, I mean that they never seem to run out of water but it's does more damage, those flows, than any other time. It just comes through at such a pace. It comes through at such a pace that there's choke points in it. And the first thing that happens, it erodes the banks. And that's been exacerbated. Like, if you go back before the 2000s and that, a friend of mine up in Seymour, they for generations had a license to dredge the river. They basically got the gravel out of it for batching plants and other sort of landscaping things like that. So the rivers ran fairly well in the centre. When a river rose, the most of the volume goes through the centre, that's fine. But as soon as it sort of starts choking it up, the first thing that it wants to do is send the water volume to the banks, starts eroding that, and the next thing that happens, it wants to find another water course. So we know this historically. All right, we've only been here 100, 200 years or whatever, but we've had most of that time people have lived on the rivers. They've got a fairly good clue what was happening with the rivers, yet the people who are now making decisions don't seem to take all those sort of things into account. And
Yeah,
and
no,
you know as well as I do that the Murray River can't take the volume that's sent down at times at certain points. And like I say, you get these floods, especially on the red gums and things like that. But
well,
why don't the people wake up? The people making decisions, they don't seem to change their position.
so how they want to get around that is they want to what they say relax constraints, which basically means they just want to flood farmers out. Because we have a thing called the Barmer choke here, and the Miller. There's a series of chokes actually, but the Barmer choke, it used to have a capacity of about I'm going to say 10,000 megs, no, maybe 9,000, I think, but it's down to under 7,000 megs a day now. And that was when the MDBA came up with the sand slug, because they were saying that, mining back in the day created this sand slug, and all the sand is actually, stopping the flows of water downstream. But we would argue that it's actually erosion from the banks. Like we have lost farmers have lost, meters and meters of banks on their farms. A good judge of that is, a farmer will have their pump shed on the banks of the river, the 10-meter buffer or whatever, and now they're having to move those pump sheds because they're going to fall in the river because they've just lost so much bank. But not only do you lose the bank, you're also losing habitat. And then obviously you've got carp, they're coming in there. That's a huge issue in the Murray, or in our river systems. They're undermining the banks, as they sit down and they chew all the mud and spit it out and eat all the vegetation that's in the bottom of the river. So, we've got that. We've been told that, under the basin plan, they want to fix native fish populations. Yes, 100% we would all support that, but that's not going to happen while you've got carp just proliferating the rivers, and they don't want to deal with that problem. That's what we find, and then they just say, oh well, we'll just take more water, that'll fix everything. But that's not fixing everything, and it's actually creating environmental problems in a different place.
I know that there's a ski carnival on the Murray every year, and I have seen photos from on Facebook from some of those organisations, and people post historic photos and that, where they used to go water skiing from, where they could, just come down to the banks and put their boat straight in the water, and then you'll see a picture years on, and that bank to the water is up to 10 feet. You can't launch a boat from up there, so they've had to go to other places and that. So the
Yeah.
evidence is there that there's this damage being done by the water flow, but that doesn't seem to come into an equation in regards to fixing the environment. That just, like you say, the answer is just keep feeding more water in the system. That will fix everything.
The banks of the Murray around here are actually like cliffs now. They are just vertical cliffs. Um, you know, it's very hard to get down to the bank to actually get down to the water now. And sandbars have moved. They've been lost as the flows increase. They're moving sandbars and all of that as well. Trees are falling in, century old trees. They're just falling in left, right, and center now. It's it's just it is it's an environmental catastrophe, but it doesn't seem to matter because we're in the mid Murray and and this is what I say, with the basin plan, it's not about environmental outcomes. It's turned into a political football match, and unfortunately, South Australia has a lot of say around that. So, politically,
Well,
political politics
well,
is
I tell you
just,
one thing about South Australia. Their 12 senators have always looked after their own state. It
yeah,
doesn't matter what side of politics they are. They're a bit like West Australian senators. They make sure that they get industry or whatever into their state. They make sure their state's protected. Uh, the problem is probably in New South Wales and Victoria in particular there's so much on party lines of ideology that they sort of skip some of those sort of things. But
And
just
don't
just
get me
on,
wrong,
on
South Australians need water. Like, they need water. Um, but yeah, they just, yeah,
yeah,
they
but
just,
South Australia, needs to actually invest in their own water infrastructure. Would be a good idea in the first
maybe they could
place.
turn on
And
their desal
secondly,
plant.
yeah. But not only that, but the thing is, just stop the bullshit of, you know, keeping the lower lakes up to that level with
Yeah,
fresh water. Sure,
yeah,
they can get it, the Murray and Darling can deliver enough water for their general purpose sort of things and general agriculture. But the idea of just flushing fresh water down the
yeah,
drain, effectively out to sea, is completely illogical. And as you know, I don't know if you know Ken Jury, but the whole point is there's
yeah,
people in South Australia who advocate that the lower lakes be reconstituted to their natural environment as estuarine environments,
yeah,
or at least use water from the Southern Ocean to keep the water level up. Because my understanding, yes, it's imperative that they keep the lower lakes full, basically because they're so acidic. The soils in there are so acidic from previous pyrite mining and that in the Adelaide Hills that if they dried out and just become a muddy sludge, they'd just be basically an acid bath. So they need to
mm,
be covered with water all the time. But that doesn't stop, you using seawater rather than fresh water. And then you can keep that
yeah.
allocation in South Australia for other use, agriculture, drinking, or whatever. Plus, take the load off the Murray River itself.
And I think you'll find there's quite a nice housing estate nestled on it as well. On one of
Yeah,
the communities.
but Ken Jury and all those people already addressed that. Is no, yeah, they understand. You've got to keep the barrages to keep the level up, but it doesn't mean you can't use seawater to keep that
Yeah,
level
100%.
because it was
Yeah.
originally a estuarine environment anyway. So, and it
Yeah.
had it actually had a fishing fleet of 40 fishing boats to catch mulloway in the lakes and also down the Coorong. So all that's gone because of what they've done. So you're causing more problems to fix a problem that doesn't exist if and or keep something in artificial rather than natural sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But yeah, this
So,
is the basin plan in all its glory, isn't it?
but the other thing is now we have got the National Water Agreement being revised too. So I think it's the first revision of the water agreement for I think it's 2012 maybe.
It's
And
a disaster in its current form though, Bill.
yes, but looking at the agreement and talking to Sarah Lowen from up further up in the Darling area with her Irrigator group, it doesn't look as though it's going to bode well for irrigators and people who want to use the water for production. It adds another dimension in regards to environmental and also cultural heritage purposes and that. So you now got another layer of pressure saying, well, you people who have got productive use of water, you actually have to have less because we want more allocation for this, and this. So it's like it's coming from at you and all people on river systems who are dependent on river systems for agriculture and that to get another good whack.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It is just, it has been a revolving door of the last probably 18 months, particularly, have just been a revolving door of absolute disastrous, unthought through bits of policy that just keep getting spat out. Obviously they get a problem and then they think, oh, well, we'll fix it. A classic example of that is relaxing constraints. They've spent millions and millions of dollars on that. I don't know if it's 97 or 107 or some massive amount of money. They still haven't got anywhere with relaxing constraints. Now in New South Wales, what they want to do is they're going to go through this process where they'll compulsory acquire your land. And then they'll flood you, but also they've written into legislation that any liability to the Murray Darling Basin Authority or, any government department has been, taken away. So, sorry, we've flooded you. It was an accident, but sorry, and that's it. And,
No responsibility.
farmer. Sorry, Bill.
No responsibility.
Yeah. That's just another thing. And then now they're bringing in wetland protection, which, I guess, is not a bad thing if you've got a decent wetland, but their modeling was wrong. They had wetlands in the middle of paddocks, in the middle of sandy paddocks, dips, in the ground. They were put in as wetlands, like they just did an absolute debacle of that as well. And if people aren't on top of these things and they go through, it's too late, but they have just been so much stuff has come through. We spend half our time reading changes to legislation. What does that mean to us? How are those impacts? And people are just so tired of a bill. They're just, they're, they're it, it's
You get buried
impossible.
under
I
the
work
paper.
in this space and it's impossible to keep up with.
I think the other thing is too is what concerns me is the people on the ground and who have had long histories of expertise, and it's not just farmers. I know that there's a lot of people. They're probably getting a bit long in the tooth now, in their 70s and 80s, but had a lot of history in regards to working with the Department of Agriculture or other government groups. We used to have a system of agricultural stations and research stations all scattered over Australia. And those people build up a lot of knowledge. And it was the same in the logging industry with foresters and that. There were people who, spent most of their life, they worked for the government, for forestry and that, but they had decades of knowledge on how the system worked because they lived in the system. They lived out in the forest. They lived on the land and that. But now all this legislation is basically being pushed through and thought up by sort of academics and people who have never been out of the bigger city sort of thing. Yet, they are the font of all knowledge. How frustrating do you find that in regards to some of the information that they've based their decisions on in regards to why they're pushing this legislation and how much.
And it is frustrating, Bill, but also what's frustrating is it's a revolving door of people that get put in positions. Then you spend half your time because our message hasn't changed over the years. We've been saying the same thing forever and a day. We just have to continually keep saying it to different people because we you might have somebody in a department and they finally understand some of our issues, and then they get another job or they get moved maybe they ask some questions and they get moved on or, whatever. But like, not only do people not have any idea, well, I mean, obviously people have idea, but they don't may not understand the impacts of what they're trying to bring into our areas. But then, we get a new person in again and a new person in again, and you've got to re-educate everybody again and again and again. And that seems to be part of our role as well. You know, different water ministers, different agricultural ministers, different DQ people, different MDBA people, different Water New South Wales people, and every area is different and has its own unique parameters and impacts and whatever. And and I guess in some ways, where you are is probably how you look at the river system as well. I'm always careful to say, we don't want to have all the water in the system for irrigation. We know that there needs to be environmental flows, but the environmental flows, particularly I know up in the Gumbow Forest where I am, oh, I don't know how many years ago it was now, maybe 5 or 6, but they flooded the Gumbow Forest, and the water sat there for 8 months, and I think it was 2018. Um, and it sat there for 8 months, and it basically just cooked all the understory. And there's a track out there, and the track has sort of acted as a bit of a buffer. And so on one side of the track is where the environmental water was, and on the other side is where it couldn't go, and that still had the wattles and the understory. And where this environmental water sat, it's just like a stark landscape. It's all hard pack and there's nothing there. And I sat in on an MDBA meeting, and they actually gave that watering an A on their little, watering scale for environmental outcomes. And I
regardless of
actually said,
consequences.
yeah, well, they're ticking their own homework. I actually said to them, well, you know what? I actually know where that was. And I said, you have nuked the landscape. Like, how can you possibly give that an A? But if you didn't know, you would just go, oh, wow, look at that. Like, that's been a wonderful, um, outcome. But, and I mean, they do some good things with environmental water as well. But one of the problems with it is, it can only go to certain places, and because they're getting so much of it, or particularly here, they keep flooding the same spots. And these are the sort of the issues that are starting to pop up. So, any regeneration is basically wiped out the next year because it's flooded again. And now what they're finding in the Gumbow Forest is the weed burden in there. There's Patterson's curse is spreading everywhere. They're getting so many suckers and things growing in the depressions and things that the water birds are not even, like, it's so enclosed in there now. They want the open spaces and they can't find any, so which also contributes then to the fuel load. And away we go. It's a vicious circle.
Do you also think there's a problem? I mean, I'm a constitutionalist. I believe the separation of powers and responsibilities between the state and the federal. And the Constitution says basically the states are responsible for water, and the Commonwealth will not make any laws regarding storage or usage of water. It's roughly something like that, or conservation of water. In other words, the Commonwealth doesn't belong in the water scheme at all. Do you think that's the problem that's happened over the years, that the clout of the Commonwealth and its nationalisation or equalisation of water across Australia, and its influence has been a problem? Because to me, it just gives you another layer of bureaucracy who have never been out on the land. They don't have any offices, anywhere near the Murray or Darling sort of thing. They don't have any people who have got any experience, yet they got such a big say because they have the big bucket of money. So do you think it would be reasonable for maybe the states to start arcing up and sort of saying, well, the Commonwealth needs to get out of this and we'll look after water?
Oh, well, ever since the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders come into the market, it hasn't been great, has it, for regional Australia or for the Southern Basin anyway, that's for sure. Yeah, look, definitely. But I mean, who we seem to lack leaders with balls these days, Bill. So, you know, I don't know.
But here, but there's examples all over the place. Uh, Education, right? That belongs to the states. You
Yeah,
know, right up until 2000, that the states ran their own curriculums and things like that. Basically, I remember as a kid, we had our own education system, and there was always a great argument in regards to whose system was the better. There was a bit of a competition between, of course, New South Wales and Victoria. There was always sort of, sort of a competitiveness in regards to who got the best results, sort of thing. So, there was that competitive, and that was the design of the federation was competitive federalism. Is that the states did things in their own sphere,
yeah,
and then whatever state rose to the top in a thing, other people tried to catch up. Now, West Australia, we are, the other side is as we were known, sort of thing. Is we had a great education system. We finished our education in 12 years, not 13. So we were coming out of school between 16 and 17. And in the eastern states, they were coming out 17 to 18 or whatever. Um, and we had a very good standard. Now, since the Commonwealth's got involved and sort of basically had NAP plan and things like that, what's the education system been like? Eh? Use
yeah,
that as a guide of Commonwealth um, control and what
yeah,
benefits it
100%.
brings.
Yeah.
So
Well, look, people
everything,
say there's too many layers of government, don't they? State, federal, and local.
but it does,
So,
but that's not it. It's not even that. It's the fact that the federal government is interfering in sets of things that under the
yeah,
Constitution they are not entitled to, and the states need to start to take that. The only reason that's happened is because the Commonwealth now collects 95% of the revenue and basically coerces the state governments to to lock into these, whether it's centralised planning for education, and we know it's not working. What's got to happen is the Commonwealth has got to give us money without any strings so the states can get on with it.
yeah,
But
no,
just to another
I
thing,
agree. Because I
the
know
other
when
thing,
the Restoring Our Rivers bill was coming through, we lobbied some politicians, and we went at it pretty hard, and to try and kind of say, these are the impacts, and I think they understood. But Blibberset came in and she offered, I think somebody a travel subsidy, so they voted for it. Like that was somebody else got offered something else that they wanted, and basically how could we compete with that? And we lost those state votes. So yeah, it was, sorry, not state votes, but we lost those Senate votes. So you know it's just politics, and unfortunately, the politics is really impacting on what's happening in our rural communities. And as I said before, that's where we might only be small as far as population or whatever, but we produce, you know, a lot of the food that you eat. And without us, I don't know. It's a scary thought to think if we're going to rely on importing food, we're also going to probably import biosecurity risks. What happens if we have another COVID and everything's shut down? We saw what happened then when people were trying to get things into the country. Imagine if that's, how our food is going to be sourced in the future. I mean, it's just a frightening thought.
just as a matter of how many sort of irrigated groups are there throughout Australia or people who are
Oh,
involved in this water? No,
there,
because
there's
obviously there's people further up north in New South Wales is your group. So how many groups are actually involved when the discussions are on?
Oh, look, irrigated groups are getting smaller and smaller, Bill, as everything is happening. Obviously, you've got your New South Wales Irrigators Council that are, the broad group. There's us. We're lucky that were funded by ourselves. Now that's changed now. We don't know where our funding's going to come from in the future either. So, it costs a lot of time and a lot of money to sit in and, oh, not money, but there's a lot of time to, sit through all these changes and like people, I see a lot of the same faces and I see a lot of old wise people in the farming water game. They're getting older. We need the next generation to start to come through because they're getting tired and had it. They've had their go for 40 or 50 years. They want to pass the torch on to somebody else. And young people just want to farm. They're not, and I mean, I understand that when I was a dairy farmer, I was too busy just trying to farm. I didn't have time to be thinking about the broader landscape and, what's happening outside my front gate as far as, water security, political deals and all that stuff. People just want to farm, but, unfortunately, the world we're in now is the decisions that are being made because there's such a disconnect now, catastrophic.
But the thing is too, go back 40 years, the Minister of Agriculture and the Department of Agriculture or anyone were there actually working for you, and it was in
Yes.
their best interest that you grew and
Yeah.
your industry grew and people made money at it and the people survived. But now it's it's like the Department of Climate Change and whatever and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the rest of the stuff starts to get in and say, well, this is the all-encompassing thing, and so you need to do this, this, and this, which are all negative on your activities. So
Mm.
it's got to the situation where even the departments that's supposed to look at after you are actually got a foot in another camp that they're trying to satisfy, and to satisfy that other camp means basically not looking after your best interest, and that not just, and that's across a lot of industries. If you
Yeah,
look
for
at
sure.
things like logging and things like that, they've picked off the forestry industry using the exact same method, saying, well, uh, although you've got the Minister of Agriculture and the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, and all that supposed to be looking at, but the emphasis in satisfying the climate things or whatever start to take toll on that. Say, well, we've got can't log forests because we've got to keep them to suck the carbon out of the air. So you destroyed it. West Australia and Victoria, they've gone by the way. New South Wales, of course, is under pressure. I think Queensland, we're pretty right until about 2030 because there's a lot of agreements already in place that have, the guarantees. But I suspect after that we'd be open slather on loggers and things like that. So do
Mm.
you think there's a need for, even though you're in immigration sort of thing, that you need to sort of get all the other groups of people in regional industry type things, and it doesn't matter whether it's livestock, milk, cotton growing, rice growing, uh, sheep raising, or whatever, that they actually need to sort of, instead of being a lot of different little groups, they've really got a common enemy sort of thing that they need to sort of say, we need to sort of have a backstop against some of this legislation that's coming through and that's picking off each individual group. Do you ever see a hope of that somewhere getting a bit of a Guernsey that you have to start working with other industries to sort of protect each other?
Look, yes, but the reality of that is quite difficult. I know, particularly in the water space, um, you know, they've been very good at picking off groups and setting them against each other. And that has been it's really hard because people got so much at stake. But so what I'm referring to is there's been like the MDBA have come in and said to some, because they want to relax constraints, which is basically flood farmers. They've offered, some farmers, we can put a bridge in here, so that means you'll have access. So say that person on that particular road says, "Yep, right, I'll put my hand up, I'll take a bridge." This person down here says, "Oh no, I don't want to be flooded." They've kind of pitted farmer against farmer in some ways in some areas, when it comes to trying to get their way. And I think that they do that with industry as well. I mean, everybody wants to, if you're an irrigator, well, obviously you want to protect, your water asset. I get what you're saying, but I'd like to think it would be possible, but it would be difficult. It's, yeah, I don't know. It's hard.
Well, I think the renewables is a classic
Yeah.
case in regards to playing one landowner against the other.
Yep.
I mean, uh, there's just an instance out here in the southern Downs in Queensland and that, and basically, someone's connected to someone who's happy to have wind turbines on their land and sort of, and is happy to host them. But you'll find all of a sudden that they've got a 4 or 5 kilometre asphalt road to their, leading to their property now and things like that. There's all these sort of
Yes.
strange benefits.
Yeah.
And we've also got the situation, I mean, living living down in Victoria, I mean, your place is a mess. It's got to be, the whole area has got to be a big, massive wind turbines and solar farms and that. You can just see some community members are really getting upset
Yes.
about what's going on. Yet there's beneficiaries like even the councils, they get this community money or something like that, and they'll sell out industries that have been there for 100 years to get hold of that community money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how much
They've done
bad
that with
will
the
do you?
Basin Plan, Bill. So,
Pardon?
they've done that with the Basin Plan. Plibisec's given us I think it's a $300 million slush fund, which I think equates to about $160 billion, $160 million for New South Wales, to, put into communities that are going to be impacted by, buybacks. We would say that, farmers in our footprint produce $6 billion worth of, agricultural product every year. $300 million or $160 million is not going to do much to our communities. What good is putting in a new football shed or football ground or lights if you've got nobody in there to play in the team? It's just madness.
Yeah, well, it's just, and I think the councils are folding a lot of this in regards to their thinking because they see this as getting some assets. But like you say, the problem is it's like a big sugar hit. But the thing is, if the industries wind down, well, you don't need as many people to fix machinery. You don't need many people to supply fuel and all that thing to the growers and that because they're gone. And so what you get is this wind back of the communities. So, like you're saying, so you might get a new football state, but in 15 years' time, the school populations around there might be gone down from 100 down to 25. So it spells the doom for you in long term. So it's to get rid of industries that are, and had 100 years standing or 50 years standing in favour of just a bit of a cash flash is sort of suicide. Look,
Yeah.
although it is slow.
Yeah. And I understand, the shy say, well, we put our hand up because the money's going to be there. and everyone else is going to get it, so we might as well get it so we can put it towards something. But at the end of the day, it would be far better off if we could just continue to irrigate and support our rural towns. We would be far wealthier, healthier, and our environment would be far more productive if we had irrigation. So, our soils up here are, our soils, our climate, all those things. We've got the storage. Our forefathers built the dams, to drought-proof the nation. And here we are, we're just doing the complete opposite. And I don't know. I just don't understand.
Do you think what also needs to happen is, in regards to like the Basin plan, is that the government department or the people who make the decisions on all this ought to be plonked down, say in Hay or somewhere like that, and all right, you have to live here and make the decisions for this area, and in regards to the basin and that. Because
Yes.
this business where they're so distant from the situation, they're not even talking to the same group of people. They're talking in their own bubble, whether it's in Canberra, Sydney, or Melbourne.
Yeah.
Do we need to extract these people in the government's departments that have a big impact on different industries, actually uproot them from Canberra and Melbourne and Sydney and plonk them where their decision making has an impact?
And they yes, and they should be able to stay in a role long enough that if they stuff it up, they should have to fix it. It's pretty easy to just go, okay. I mean, I'm sure we'll have a new federal water minister, sometime soon. And I'm sure Plibersek won't look back. She'll just, she can't even come into our region to um, even just come and have a look and at our region how it works to try and get an understanding. She's not interested. She don't care. Her Redfern voters are where she cares, and I say quite often that her legacy is going to be one of dust and destruction because she is pushed for this water recovery that A, they don't know how they're going to deliver it. B, we don't know what environmental outcomes we're supposedly going to get from it. And, and she's wiped away the social and economic test. So, you know, it's just, yeah, she just doesn't care.
But as we go to the election, what is I mean, uh, what you the seat of Farrer is already in the hands of the Liberal Susan Ley. Um, I don't want to go into her position, but I don't see her as being any sort of savior, or that. So, but in the other areas, other federal seats around there, what's the general mood like? And then also, reflecting on that as we go through, although the state elections are still a little way off in that, Victoria's a little bit closer. What's the mood in regards to the feeling of the political situation in regards to what's best for agriculture and the regions?
Ooh, good question, Bill. Um, Look, I don't know. Like, the coalition government were in power for, 10 or 11 years or whatever they were. The Basin Plan was very much part of their remit. They just kicked the can down the road. Labor came in. Obviously, Plibersek, one of the Labor's promises was to return this 450 gigalitres of water to the river. So she's obviously, gone full throttle at that. Um, you know, Independence, well, you know, they're they're never going to be in government, are they? Because they can't form a minority, like they're not a party. So, I don't know. Look, I know. Helen Dalton, she's done a wonderful um, job for Murray. She's been advocating for water since she got in. And like I know today I went to Denny and she's got this 7 point plan. She's hammering Chris Minns any chance she gets. She's a real advocate for water and she fights for it. She understands how important it is to our communities. She works really hard to try and change the narrative. She's done a video, she calls it the fake lakes, I think. And she's just done one on carp, which she shows it at New South Wales. She's given it a real crack. You know, I, I, Politically, unfortunately, I don't see an answer in anybody. And I think for us, because we've been so impacted by the basin plan, by buybacks and all those things, New South Wales Murray General Security, so our farmers used to have allocation reliability used to be about 84%, and now it's down to about 48%. Now, the last couple of years have been 100%, but that's probably because of, wetter years or whatever. But, we're seeing our allocation reliability erode away. We have a sustainable diversion limit and we operate well underneath that. We have underuse, quite significant underuse. If they could return that productivity, back to the regions, that generates more dollars for government, richer communities, flow on, flow on. But I don't know. I I I don't know how you unpack it, Bill. Or unpick it, I should say. I
I
don't
think
know.
the other thing that's happened too is the Australian Senate really has become a problem over the years where um, you could get a bit of sense out of it. But now you've got 18 independents in there. You've got 12 Greens. You got Pocock as well. Basically, I have a bit of worry about a couple of other ones that are independents being a bit on the greener tin sort of thing. So the Senate also becomes a bit of a problem. Is that it was originally designed to protect the states and the states' interests, but now it's such a political line system, and also now with such a big contingent of Greens and independents, it's now hard for the Senate to actually, protect the states and their interests that well. So I don't know what we're going to do that. And the other big problem in regards to New South Wales, the population of Sydney and Wollongong, well, New South Wales is basically is Newcastle, Sydney, and Wollongong in it, and it keeps growing.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
your seats even
yeah.
in the Sydney Parliament are dissipating. I mean the size of the Murray electorate, the Baldwin and that is just growing immensely. Um,
Yeah, I think it's
it,
7 hours if you
it's
want
a
to
lack
drive
of
from one end of Murray
representation
to
in the
the other.
regions. It's a real problem.
Yeah, yeah, it's 7 hours from one end to the other for Murray.
Yeah, well, sometimes you would think you'd probably be better off being part of Victoria or South Australia rather than the long distance it is to Sydney.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, Bill. And that's where you've got David Landini with his Riverina state idea. I don't know if you've spoken to him, but he's
Oh,
always
often.
yeah. So, like people try, but I don't know, Bill. I don't know. In an
I think
ideal world, we just farm and grow food and leave it up to everybody else, but that's not the way life is now.
yeah, and the government be working for you, not against you.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't understand it. But anyway,
Yeah. All right, we've gone over the air on that well, truly. just what's on your plate? What's on your plate over the next, say, between now and the election, and then after the election, do you have to recalibrate if the government changes?
Yeah, look, I mean, we continually try and talk to anybody. We obviously it's very hard to go federally. I think the last time we got into Canberra was mm, maybe 2 years ago. But we'll just try and work with whoever we can to try and progress irrigation and I'm personally I'm in the process of trying to get a study up um, where we can monitor the environmental opportunity in irrigation. So I'm pretty keen to push that. What I want to see is different industries in different geographical locations and get some monitoring up, with cameras and sound and whatever, and push to try and actually get some studies on the ground. I find when I try and talk to people, we know what benefit irrigation has to, water birds and, different things. But, if we can get some studies up, so that's something that we are going to push. I know that's not political, but that is something that we're looking at quite seriously. And yeah, keep we'll just keep on keeping on and hope that some common sense returns before it's too late. Because yeah,
Uh, okay, if you could just stay on the line, I'll just introduce next week, and then I'll talk to you offline for a little bit.
sure.
Okay, if you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and also to our YouTube channel. Next week, my guest will be the Mayor of Mount Isa, Peter McRae, and we'll be talking about the impacts of the closure of the copper mine, Glencore copper mine up there. And most recently, there's another mining venture at risk, is the phosphate mining. That looks like going into administration, and how much hope they're pinning on the copper string project in the future. So join us next week when I talk to the Mayor of Mount Isa, Peter McRae. Thank you.